Ladies and gentlemen, hello. This is the next lesson in the Cold War series for my world history students, and we're going to have a little bit different format here. Look at the screen. You see the arrow keys that you will also find at the bottom of your keyboard. And to manipulate through this video when you're watching it, you can go back by hitting the back arrow. You can go forward in the video by hitting the forward arrow. Sometimes you need to go back so you can look up the answers to the questions I'm going to give you. So let's get started on this lesson regarding the Cold War. This lesson is about MAD, Mutual Assured Destruction. It's Cold War lesson number 12, and Mutual Assured Destruction is all about we die, you die. So we had enough missiles pointed at the Soviet Union, so if we attacked them, they had an equal number of missiles pointed at us, and they would attack our cities, and both of our cities and both of our countries would be destroyed. And the destruction was so terrible that neither side wanted to start a war because they knew if the other side retaliated, they would suffer as well. That's what mutual assured destruction. Mutual means both, assured means guaranteed, and destruction. So both will be guaranteed to be destroyed. Let's go to the next screen and see what's going on here. Well, MAD is Mutual Assured Destruction from 1960 to 72. When the Cold War tensions heightened at the start of the 1960s, the superpowers were drawn into an escalating arms race. The world's safety depended on nuclear paradox known as mutual assured destruction. That's what a paradox is, an inconsistency. It means that one thing happens and you don't expect something else to happen. So it was at the beginning of the time of John F. Kennedy was just elected in 1960. And John F. Kennedy went to Europe and he had a big meeting in Vienna. And the European leaders looked down on our president. They thought he was too young and immature and he wasn't up to their standards. So that caused a lot of problems for the United States and also for President Kennedy. So on alert, during the Cold War, the armed forces of both the United States and Russia were in a state of constant vigilance. We used to have airplanes that were in the air all the time, ready to go into Russia and bomb the cities. And they were in the air, ready to go at all times. Part of our airplanes were up there waiting for that to happen. War, if it came, would soon go nuclear. Ballistic missiles, early warning system, radars were in operation in Alaska, Greenland, and England and America. We remembered what happened in Pearl Harbor, and we didn't want that to happen. We didn't want a surprise attack. In 1961, John F. Kennedy became the new American president. He inherited the doctrine of massive retaliation to a Soviet attack. He got that from Eisenhower, but he was a supporter of this because John F. Kennedy was an anti-communist. He was a Catholic, and he did not like communism because of their persecution of the Catholic Church. So he inherited the doctrine of massive retaliation from Eisenhower, the previous president. Massive retaliation had been conceived at a time of clear U.S. nuclear superiority. We started it when we were on top, but now the Russians were trying to catch up to us. So these are the questions. Now look at how that pops up there. These are the actual test questions that you're going to take when you take the test. So I would suggest you write down the answers on a piece of paper because these are the questions you're going to get on your test. The first question will be, what does mutual assured destruction mean? Well, if you hit the back arrow on your keyboard, you can go back and look at the text up there. And then you can go forward and look at the question again. So what is a nuclear paradox is the second question, and I gave you that answer when you were looking at it. And these are all multiple choice. So in the early 60s, the U.S. had hundreds of missiles and airplanes with nuclear warheads pointed at the Soviet Union. In the case of war, the Soviets were warned that all of their cities and most of their military would be destroyed. What was this policy called that we were going to retaliate against the Soviet Union? Write down your answers after you answer the questions. You can pause, of course, you can pause the movie by hitting the space bar. Now we'll go to the next build-up. Here's the guy you see in the picture there is Nikita Khrushchev. He was a character. He was kind of bold and rash, and he did not really have a very high opinion of John F. Kennedy. You know, when Eisenhower was in, he was kind of kept in check because Eisenhower was head of all the armed forces in World War II. Khrushchev remembered Eisenhower, and he was kind of a little intimidated by Eisenhower, but not by John F. Kennedy, was not by our President Kennedy. Nikita Khrushchev was very rude in the way he treated our president, I felt at the time. But anyway, this Soviet leader, Nikita Khrushchev, he wanted to remind the West of his nation's power. On October 30th in 61, he broke a moratorium between the United States and Russia not to test nuclear weapons. Here's what that meant. We had come to an agreement with Russians prior to Khrushchev, and we said, look, the weapons are getting too big and too powerful and too dangerous, so let's not stop testing them. America was going to stop testing any new atomic weapons, and they asked the Soviet Union to do the same thing, and both the United States and the Soviet Union agreed that they would no longer test nuclear weapons to make them bigger and more powerful because it was could become a threat to the world and certainly to both countries. So anyway, a Russian bomber dropped the largest bomb in the world had ever seen. Its explosion was the equivalent of more than 50 million tons of TNT. That one bomb was more than all the explosives used in World War II. It was so powerful that people 50 miles away were knocked off their feet when the bomb was dropped. Khrushchev did that by breaking the agreement he had with the United States not to test nuclear weapons. President Kennedy was really angry at that. By the new Soviet test, he announced that the United States would proceed with its development of nuclear weapons. So now we took off. Now we're going to start testing. But public opinion in the West was turning against the nuclear arms buildup. In Europe, the campaign for nuclear disarmament and ban the bomb groups began to emerge. There were all these political groups that came out and had demonstrations, ban the bomb. They were afraid of the nuclear weapons and they wanted to ban them. Kennedy and his defense secretary, Robert McNamara, meanwhile, were having second thoughts about the strategy of massive retaliation. Now it meant the United States would be initiating the use of nuclear weapons against an equally equipped Soviet Union. McNamara was a strange character. He was the guy that really engineered the Vietnam War. He was really the main philosophical backer of the Vietnam War. And he was Kennedy's Secretary of Defense. Now, McNamara presented the U.S. military planners with an appealing alternative. He said, look, no cities, counterforce. That's what we'll do. Soviet cities were no longer going to be targeted by American missiles. Only Soviet military bases would. But the new strategy was dismissed by the Soviets as self-deluding. So they didn't even care what we said. If they said, we don't believe you, you're going to attack our cities. They didn't believe that what we said, that we were not going to attack their cities. Here's the test questions. Why did Khrushchev detonate the massive hydrogen bomb in October 61? And you can answer the questions. Question 5. Groups who were opposed to the use of nuclear weapons in war were called, the people that were opposed to the use of nuclear weapons in war, what were they called? And the Soviets thought that, question 6, the Soviets thought that Kennedy administration idea that we should not target each other's cities any longer. How the Soviets think about that policy proposed by the Kennedy administration that we would not target their cities? And that's the answer for question 6. All right, let's move on. A close call. Wow. I want to remind you of the fact that Khrushchev did not really respect Kennedy. There's a certain way you can tell that. He was afraid of Eisenhower, but not of Kennedy. As soon as after that meeting they had in Vienna and early in the Kennedy administration, within a short period of time, the Soviet Union built the Berlin Wall. They never would have done that with Eisenhower as president. They would have been afraid. And then shortly after that, they put nuclear missiles in Cuba, just 90 miles from the United States. Well, that caused a problem, as we're going to see. Close call. In October 62, the Cuban Missile Crisis brought the world to the brink of nuclear war. For 2 weeks, Moscow and Washington were involved in a tense contest of wills over the presence of Soviet missiles in Cuba. Khrushchev, confronted by Kennedy's nuclear superiority, backed down, ending the crisis. But both sides were shocked at how close they had come to nuclear war. I always remember that what Kennedy had done. He put a quarantine around Cuba and would not let any more Soviet ships come in and deliver any missiles to Cuba. And Khrushchev said, I'm going to go block that. And if you sink our ships, that means war. So people were afraid. And we knew exactly what time the Soviet ships were bound to hit the American quarantine. I remember sitting at San Diego City College with a bunch of other veterans, and we were sitting in the lunch area looking at the clock and saying, well, they're almost there. At 11 o'clock, they're going to be there. Let's see what happens. We're just counting down the minutes, thinking that it was going to be a nuclear war. Well, both sides were shocked at how close they had come to a nuclear war over this. The Soviets backed down and took their missiles out of Cuba, but they got a guarantee from President Kennedy that we would never invade Cuba, and also that we would take our missiles out of Turkey. So one of the things that they did was a good idea. Khrushchev and Kennedy set up a hotline. It was a red telephone. It's a direct communication link between the Soviet and U.S. capitals. So anytime if Khrushchev wanted to talk to Kennedy, just pick up his red phone and immediately be contacted with Kennedy. And Kennedy could do the same thing to immediately contact Khrushchev. Several months later, the Soviet Union and the United States and Britain agreed to a limited test ban treaty, ending atmospheric tests. We wanted to end these tests in the atmosphere of these nuclear weapons. Nuclear testing would continue, but underground now, not up in the air. The race to increase stockpiles continued as well, as the Kremlin, smarting from the Cuban crisis, vowed never again to confront America from a position of weakness. So they had tons of missiles still pointed at the United States, and guys, believe it or not, there are still missiles pointed at our major cities. You think you're safe, you've got a bunch of nuclear missiles pointed right at your city you live in right now. A grim logic was beginning to emerge. Nuclear disarmament was not achievable, yet nuclear war was unthinkable. The White House became convinced that the strategy of MAD, mutual assured destruction, was the only deterrent to nuclear conflict. It was the only thing we had to stop each side from attacking each other. MAD. So here are the questions. 7. How did the Soviets react to the Cuban Missile Crisis? Question 8. What did the U.S., Britain, and the Soviets do to ban atmospheric testing? Question 9. What was the purpose of the hotline? Remember that red telephone between the Soviet Union and President Kennedy? And what was the grim logic? Question 10. What was the grim logic that emerged from the Cuban Missile Crisis? And 11. The MAD strategy was what? So there's your 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11 questions are right there. And you can go back and forth and look up the answers as you answer them. Write them down on a piece of paper, and then when you're going to actually take this test, you'll have the answers for you. You'll know what the answers are ahead of time. Deterrence. For MAD to succeed, each side needed to be able to retaliate even after it had suffered a surprise attack. Submarines now played a crucial role as a mobile launch platforms for nuclear missiles. They used to put the missiles on submarines that could be just hidden away. Both sides practiced civil defense against nuclear attack, but it was generally believed that it was impossible to defend against nuclear weapons. So they had duck and cover, and they had air raid drills and all kinds of things, and people were building bomb shelters in their backyards. All that was going on during these years, the early 60s. Even short of war, a nuclear deterrence carried its own dangers. In 1966, over the coast of Spain, a United States bomber collided in midair with a tanker plane. As the planes crashed, 4 hydrogen bombs were scattered over the coast. 3 hit the ground and were recovered. 1 fell into the ocean and was lost for 80 days. Whoa. Luckily, the bombs didn't go off. Such a broken arrow incidents were growing as both sides increased their nuclear arsenals. Once you have that many missiles going and many airplanes in the air all the time and submarines, it's always possible for an accident to happen. The U.S. had 3 methods of attack. These were long-range bombers, and we kept a third of them in the air all the time. Intercontinental ballistic missiles, which were in underground silos, and nuclear submarines. Nuclear submarines were especially lethal. They were designed to stay under the water for long periods of time and were very hard to detect. They could surface at any time and launch their missiles. They were a problem. Those nuclear missiles were really dangerous. So here are the questions 12, 13, and 14. The policy of deterrence was designed to prevent war. Now, what are these 5 answers here? Which one of the 5 answers could you answer? 13. Civil defense refers to the actions that the civilian population can take to protect against nuclear attack. Which statement below is true about civil defense? And then you answer the questions. Question 14. What was the shortest route for the Soviet and U.S. missiles and bombers to attack each other? Well, the shortest way was over the North Pole. It's actually closer to go to Russia over the North Pole than it is to go across the Atlantic Ocean from west to east. So those are your questions 12, 13, and 14. I gave you the answer to 14. Anti-missiles. Now a new era came in. The Soviet military was unconvinced by the MAD theory. They worked to develop anti-ballistic missiles, ABMs they were called, that could destroy U.S. missiles in flight. The introduction of ABMs destabilize the concept of MAD. So if the Russia could shoot down our missiles, then MAD wasn't working anymore, because then they could shoot them down and they wouldn't be under any pressure from our missiles. Tensions in the Middle East brought on by the 1967 Six-Day War, which was a war that Israel fought with its neighbors, prompted U.S. President Johnson and Soviet Premier Kosygin to meet in a summit. They said, we got to get together before this thing gets out of hand and one of us starts shooting. The issue of ABMs was high on their agenda. U.S. scientists, meanwhile, prepared a countermeasure. Multiple interdependently targeted re-entry vehicles, MIRVs for short. One single missile could carry 10 separate warheads. So now what they did is they took 10 hydrogen bombs, put them on one missile, and they'd send the one missile over to the United States, and then the 10 missiles would break off from the main missile and go and attack 10 cities. That's what they came up with. It was getting crazy. Nixon the peacemaker. Nixon is often discredited in your history books and things, and eventually in history in a long time, he's going to go down as one of the most effective presidents we've had. By 1969, the superpowers were between them spending more than $50 million a day on nuclear armaments. It was a burden both sides found intolerable, and it led to negotiations known as SALT. SALT means Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty. And the SALT dragged on until 1972, when President Nixon came in, and he went to Moscow, and he signed the arms agreement with the Soviet Premier Brezhnev. By then they had a different head of the Soviet Union, Brezhnev. And ABMs had now been discredited, but both sides could not come to a lasting agreement on offensive nuclear weapons. Preparations for global annihilation really continued. But at least they were talking instead of shooting. And at the bottom you see a picture of Nixon when he went to China and opened up China to the West. So 15, how did the Soviets try to counteract MAD theory? 16, what missiles were designed to carry 10 nuclear warheads that both spread out and destroy 10 cities instead of one city on each target? What were the Soviet and U.S. concerned about the Six-Day War between Israel and its Arab neighbors? Why were they concerned about that? And the SALT Treaty, the Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty, what about that? Did it successfully limit offensive weapons? Was it only partly successful, but it was a start? Was it not agreed to by the Soviet, not agreed to by the U.S.? It was only partially successful. B is the answer to question 18. There, I gave you an answer. Who signed the SALT Treaty for the United States? Who signed that SALT Treaty? And you can go back over here and look up who signed the SALT Treaty and then go back over to your question again. Okay, guys, let's go on to the next scene. Now, the nuclear club, these are the nations in the world that have nuclear weapons, and it's true today. India has nuclear weapons, and Pakistan has nuclear weapons. You may have not remembered this from your other classes, but India and Pakistan are actually enemies, because India is, their religion does not comport with Islam, which is part of Pakistan. Pakistan and India are separated by religious, and they're considered enemies of each other, but they both have nuclear weapons. China has nuclear weapons, and Russia has nuclear weapons. France and England have nuclear weapons, and the United States has nuclear weapons. Most people are pretty sure that Israel also has nuclear weapons, but they don't talk about it very much. So the question for this Simon here is, which country does not have nuclear weapons today? And you can look up on the map up there to find out the answer to that. Okay? Obviously, it's Syria doesn't have any nuclear weapons, because China, India, and Pakistan all do. Well, guys, I want to thank you for your attention. You're a great class. Go Bonita. Please get in touch with me if you have any questions or you don't understand something. I'm here to help you all the time in our meeting room, our Teams meeting room. I'm there every morning and all morning. So please jump in if you have a question, okay? Thank you very much.